Councillor Oliver on the screen. That's great standing on Zoom as well. Well done. Welcome everybody to our first council meeting of the year. And we're going to start with the opening prayer. So we've got Reverend Lucy, please thank you.
I'll invite you to sit if that's okay. Excellent. Now, I was talking to the girls at school this morning and I said to them, look, if you were coming into the City Council to share a reading with them, would you like to have it out of this purple book here or out of a Bible that looks like it was made for grown-ups? And every single one of them says the purple Bible, so no matter how old you get, their preference is always for something that has colour. So this morning, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you a really, really quick reading about this wonderful idea of servant leadership. This is an idea that we use a lot around school, that actually those who are the oldest and looking after the school in formal leadership positions do it in a servant-hearted way. They look after each and every one of them. And as you know, your core business is about caring for this community. So, let me read this. Jesus and his disciples gathered in Jerusalem. Their feet were dirty from walking the dusty roads, telling people about God's dream. The disciples started arguing over which one of them was the greatest. Jesus got up and tied a towel around his waist. He took a basin of water and began to wash the feet of his friends, and then to dry them with the towel. Jesus' friends were shocked. "This is a servant's job," they shouted. But Jesus quietly continued washing their feet. When it was his special friend Peter's turn, he jumped up and said to him, "Master, you must never wash my feet." "Then you cannot be my disciple," Jesus replied. "Lord," cried Peter, "wash my feet, my heart, my hands, my head, all of me." After Jesus had finished washing his feet, he took off the towel and sat down again. "Do you understand what I have done?" he asked. "You call me Lord and teacher, but I have washed your feet like a servant. You must follow my example. The leader is the servant of all. You must be as servants to one another. No one is more important than anyone else. I want you to love each other in this way. Love one another as I have loved you." So let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you that you call each and every one of us to love others with the gifts you have given us. We are aware of the sheer amount of paperwork and reading that goes on behind a meeting such as this, and we ask that you would guide all those who are making decisions to keep an eye on the detail, to hear your words of wisdom, and to care for this community as you care for us. In the mighty name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, we pray. Amen.
So please get you all to stand up here. Thank you very much as the disciples. And we will sing the last. Good, well done. Thank you, Clive, for leading us to that. Please proceed. Sorry, Councillor Gilchrist, can you call me? Alrighty, welcome everyone to this council meeting. I'd like to especially welcome Gary from Luca and Natasha Rankin from just call for apologies. Apologies. And so we move straight into the public forum. So we've got Roger Lane here to look for us when we go to Easter Sunday trade-off. So please. The councils have already information circulated to them as discussed in 2017. You have reviewed, previously reviewed those. The floor is yours.
Mayor and councillors, I thank you for this opportunity to engage in this public forum. In 2017, about 4 years ago, central government asked local governments throughout New Zealand to make decisions about whether or not shopping should be allowed on Easter Sunday. I and many others would have preferred the central government to have made the decision, but anyway, the decision was passed to over 70 councils around New Zealand. Back in 2017, this council, or the council of the day that is, engaged in a public consultation. And I took part in that, and I was both a written submitter and an oral submitter. I was very interested in this topic, more particularly as a ratepayer, as distinct from being a member of a Christian church in South Canterbury, and therefore took a great deal of interest in the results of the consultations. It became clear that the great majority of submitters, and about half of them were from Geraldine, were totally opposed to this council permitting shopping on Easter Sunday. But the council, in spite of the evidence from the consultations, decided that there would be shopping in the Timaru District Council area. The mayor at the time predicted to me that other councils throughout New Zealand would follow suit. In other words, Timaru was going to be leading the way on this matter. I doubted his judgment at the time, said so, and now we have the evidence that his prediction was totally wrong. All our immediate council neighbours, Ashburton to the north, then Mackenzie, Waimate, Waitaki, all voted in favour of leaving the shops closed on Easter Sunday. The councils of all our major cities, Auckland, Hamilton, Wellington, Nelson, Christchurch, Dunedin, to name just some of the 70-odd councils involved, all voted to leave Easter Sunday without shopping. Now, there needs to be a little bit of recognition of the history of this subject. We've just come through a weekend acknowledging Waitangi Day, but well before the origin of Waitangi Day, Christian missionaries were the initiators of the written version, the original written version of the Maori language. And Christian principles went on to be quite influential, even dominant, in the way we formed our central government. And coming here to South Canterbury, for as long as I can remember, Christian churches have dominated the skyline here. The Basilica, St Mary's, Chalmers, and some others. And coming forward to the present, while people might have said 4 years ago, well, look, Roger, isn't it time to move on? We're no longer the Christian country we were. I have been very careful to point out that coming right forward to the present, people of South Canterbury, ratepayers of this council, have contributed an enormous sum of money in recent years to maintaining Christian churches. Some of you will no doubt be aware of all the details about how much money has been spent on the Basilica, the restoration of St Mary's, out in Temuka, the restoration of St Joseph's, the rebuild of Trinity, and in Geraldine, the upgrading for earthquakes and restoration and modernisation of St Andrews and St Mary's, and then a massive injection of money into the reconstruction of the chapel at Mount Peel Station. And furthermore, a Geraldine ratepayer has gone public in recent days saying that he's increasing his contribution to the restoration of the Christchurch Cathedral from 1 million to 5 million. So with that background, and having visited Geraldine, Pleasant Point, Temuka, Timaru shopping areas on the first 2 Easter Sundays where this bylaw allowing Easter Sunday shopping to take place, I went and walked through the shopping areas of all those places and was amazed at how few shops were open. And in Timaru, I walked both years from one end to the other of Stafford Street. One year was a fine day, the second year was a wet day, and very few shops were open. There was about as many cars in the street as you could count on 2 hands. There were hardly any pedestrians, and I thought, what on earth is this all about? So I stress that where I come from is that Easter Sunday is clearly the most important day in the Christian year. If it wasn't for the events that gave rise to Easter Sunday, we simply would not have a Christian faith. Another matter that you might like to consider is that when some rules were changed about shopping on public holidays, provision was made with respect to Anzac Day to have the first half of Anzac Day closed, and then shopping was available in the afternoon. But then when this council decided that we would have shopping on all of Easter Sunday, I came to the conclusion that as a society here in South Canterbury, we were showing more respect to our dead soldiers than we were to the risen Christ that gave rise to the Christian faith. Now that's pretty rough to say that, but that I'm sure you can see is factual. So with that background, about a year ago, I submitted to this council via the Mayor a 2-page application to have this council review its bylaw. Of course, my aim was to have them reverse the bylaw. And I set out the background, including most of what I've just said, and pointing out that we are clearly out of step with most of the rest of New Zealand. We're out of step with all our immediate neighbouring councils, and we're out of step with all the councils of our major cities. And when you look round, you cannot really come up with any justification for that continuing. And I refer back to all this money that's been spent in South Canterbury in restoring and maintaining Christian churches. So, my document also includes a summary of what I found from some of the other councils. I have actually approached about half the councils of New Zealand to see where they stand on all of this before I went into writing like this. And in most cases I spoke to either the chief executive, occasionally a mayor, and sometimes the chief executive's personal assistant. And I record the results of two discussions, one with Nelson Council and the other with neighbouring Tasman Council. And both of those councils said, look, we're not going to make a decision around our table, relying on people to make a judgment call on the part of the people they represented. So we will conduct a random sample survey using staff, using statistically correct numbers, and communicating either by email or by phone. And in both cases, the result was quite amazing. It was a very strong vote to leave the shops in Nelson and Tasman closed on Easter Sunday. And all those statistics are included in the submission. So I said I filed this exactly a year ago. It was dated the 10th of February, a year tomorrow. And it was followed up on with a meeting with the mayor in Geraldine, via a delegation from Geraldine in mid-December, just passed. And that delegation meeting with the mayor resulted in the invitation for me and a small delegation to come today. And with me, we have representatives from Geraldine and from Timaru. So, councillors, mayor, I call on you to treat this matter with a lot of seriousness. I hope you can see why I can see we're out of step with the rest of the country, and we need to get back into step, because there's no justification for being out of step any longer. And I would like the decision to be made for Easter of this year, even though it's only a couple of months away. There is a basis for this review, of course. Central government, when they passed the decision making to local government, provided a rule saying that any decision made on Easter Sunday trading must be reviewed within 5 years, not at the end of 5 years, but within 5 years. We're at the 4-year stage, and I think it's high time for the decision to be made. If you want to engage in a random sample survey like Nelson or Tasman, that's entirely over to you and the staff. I personally don't see the need for it now, because I think it would be fair to say that if places like Nelson and Tasman are going to vote so overwhelmingly in favour of no shopping on Sunday, isn't it time we followed suit?
Thanks, Roger. We'll open it up for questions from councillors. Anything specifically? So we've got options, but the way the process follows, we'll consider public forum at the end of the public meeting. So if there's no other questions at this point, yes.
Could I make an additional comment if that is the case?
We'll permit you to do so.
Could I suggest that there probably wouldn't be a single ratepayer in South Canterbury that envisages shopping on all 4 days of Easter? If there is such a person, I would be saying to them, isn't it time you get a life? Isn't there more to life than just shopping on every 4 days of Easter. And I take my clue for that in this booklet here that was being produced very recently for the Rock and Hop Festival coming up in March. It's very well put together. I don't know whether you've had a chance to study it, but on page 3, in red, it says, there is so much to see and do in the Timaru district, and we're in the perfect base for exploring the Central South Island. Yes, there's promotion for shopping in here, but shopping is only a small piece of what we have to offer. It is quite amazing in a book that size, how so much got listed and what can be done in Timaru, Pleasant Point, Temuka, Geraldine, Peel Forest, etc. So I would like to see more of this type of promotion, not just a simple attack on Easter Sunday for yet another day of shopping, but to promote the district as a whole for all that it has and the great lifestyle that we have here to share it. So I would just like to conclude by saying that if the Chamber of Commerce believes that there should be Sunday trading, I would offer a challenge to them. And I would say to them, because they did put in a submission in 2017, and they did favour the opening of shops, but I would say to them, you have 2 clear shopping days at Easter, the Saturday and the Monday. Isn't it a challenge for the retailers, the hospitality people, to promote those 2 days, make it very clear that everyone is very welcome on those 2 days, provide a great service, and then leave the other 2 days for other forms of family and public relaxation and recreation.
Fantastic, thank you. Look, so what we'll do is at the end of the meeting, before we go into public exclude, we can give them some minutes and we'll consider what the options are. So just follow the process here. So thanks, Roger, really appreciate and understand your mission for this, and we'll pick it up towards the end of the meeting. Thank you. Alrighty, so moving forward, team, so a little bit to get through. So we're going to go to identification of urgent business, anything? No, anything matters of one nature? Declaration of conflicts of interest. Nothing. So before we start, I just want to move in regard to item 13.3 that we've currently got in public excluded, that we move that to public. So with the note that we'll just redact for the public any information around commercially sensitive numbers, so we just have to be aware of that with the conversation. So can I have a second to that? Councillor Piddington? Everyone comfortable with that? I've got the motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
It's carried. So we'll pick it up after 6. Okay, so moving forward, we have proclamation of minutes. So council meeting on December 7.1, page 6. Move it, Councillor O'Reilly. Councillor Gilchrist, motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. It's carried. Item 7.2, minutes of the 22nd. I'm going to move that. Councillor Burt, motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. It's carried. 7.3, tenders and procurement meeting. I'm going to move that. Who else is there? Thank you. Motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. It's carried. 8.1. Scheduled functions attended by Mayor, Deputy Mayor and councillors, and I appreciate anyone that's attended functions on behalf of the elected members. Thank you. I'll move that. I'll second that. Councillor Wills, put the motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. And following Motion's attended by Chief Executive. 2. Happy to move that, Councillor Parker, thank you. Motion to the floor, all those in favour please say aye. Aye. It's carried. So we now move to reports, so we move to 9.1 on page 34. Fixing of the common seal. Standard, the mover, thank you. Councillor Wills, Councillor Gilchrist. Put the motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. It's carried. Thank you. The contracts led from tenders and procurement meeting. That's 9.2, and it's on page 36. Any questions in regard to those? Happy to move. Councillor Burt, Councillor Gilchrist. Motion to the floor. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. Alrighty, got some really good stuff in there today. Exciting today to be in attendance actually. 9.3, moving to the rating evaluation, so Don Cross.
So we've just got some guests with us from
Yeah.
Valley. We use it. So, as you know, every 3 years we go through rating revaluation for properties within the district, which is a new government valuation. Global Value undertakes this on our behalf, and we've now completed the valuation, which has been audited. So we've now got the end of the value revaluation process, and it's now about to eliminate us to get the notice of their evaluations. Team here will just outline the results of the evaluation process.
Thank you.
Okay,
thanks for having us here. All we need to do is to report on the revaluation, which is part of the three-year general revaluation of the district, which is the new set of values. The new set of values that you'll be using for rating for the next financial year from the 1st of July. I'm Gail Smith, so I'm QB's National Revaluation Manager. I have Brendan McCurley. So Brendan was involved with the day-to-day running of the revaluation, and generally he's an expert doing commercial property, industrial property. Chris Rogers, who's the Canterbury Area Manager for QB for revaluations, and Chris is the expert on the rural, so if you've got any rural questions, we can deal with those with Chris. We have an office in Timaru. We had about 9 people that working principally on your revaluation. So this is a process that started middle of last year. When we've just been completing the audit process as of the 29th of January. The whole revaluation process has been later than normal, which I know has put pressure on yourselves for the values we produce for your rates modelling. But the whole, nationally, the whole program was delayed 5 weeks for a start, so that you could get additional sales information to reflect any post-COVID market that may have happened. So, as you're probably all aware, this time last year we hardly heard of COVID. Then probably a month later, a lot of the economists have started to talk about 8%, 10% reductions in residential values as an impact of COVID. Nobody knew what was going to happen with commercial tourism, those sorts of things. So they're all things that have helped assist in delaying your revaluation. There's been a change of audit process which also delayed it, but we've now got those values, and tomorrow I believe they have the letterboxes, and the values are now publicly available on globalvalue.co.nz and will be available on display from your front office tomorrow. So I'll just run through these. Happy to take questions probably at the end, that's probably best, but we'll just run through it quickly. So I'm just going to run over the process and what the general statistical movements are and the timing of So everything we do in rating valuations is for under legislation of the Rating Valuations Act. So there's a lot of processes we have to stick to, audit requirements we have to stick to, a lot of standardisation. So our effective date of valuation is 1st of October 2020, but these are the values that you will use for striking the rates based on from 1st of July. We're very aware that most of your rating base is based on land value, rather than the capital value base. So you may be a bit more interested in some of the trends that happen to land values. So when we do this process, first of all, we look at all the properties that have sold, and from there do an analysis, look at the non-sold properties, apply the same trends to the non-sold property, to all the properties, to come up with the new valuation figures. So we have a very comprehensive database for a majority of the business and rural properties. We have individual workings that would help us and assist them with those values for those properties. We don't knock on the doors like we used to years ago on every property. We find that we do roadside inspect the recent sales properties, but we also do a lot of online, a lot of aerial mapping of views, particularly for farm properties. So a rating valuation is a snapshot in time, and as such, that can get out of date. So our valuation date is 1st of September 2020, and we're actually looking at a 5% growth since that date. So when these notices go out to property owners from tomorrow, there may be people who look at that and say, this valuation is too low. But we're still looking at a rising market. If we look at so in the last, since the revaluation, we're seeing that 5% growth. In the 12 months to date, we're looking at a 9% growth. And for your residential property, we're looking overall a 11% growth from the previous revaluation of 2017 to the 1st of September. Just to give you an idea. It's a point in time and things have even changed since our effective date of valuation. So we're just following what's happened in the sales, and then only look at the sales of the valuation. So this is just an overview of where the movements are. So the most notables in there are the dairy and pastoral sector, which is seeing a reduction in values, particularly the land value. So that's like almost 10% reduction in land value in the last 3 years. The sorts of movements that the dairy and pastoral sector are fairly much what's happened for the whole of New Zealand. Most dairy areas are seeing a reduction in those levels from 3 years ago. Chris will be able to talk a bit more specifics for those properties when we get to a later slide. The other big movements that you'll see most notably is residential at 26% lift in the land, 11% for capital values. That's a pretty strong growth considering when we did the revaluation 3 years ago. There was a good strong growth then, whereas most other parts of New Zealand were very stable 3 years ago. Your other movement there is utilities. There was a 10% reduction there in the land value there, and that's mainly attributable to the irrigation utility assessments. The other category that we talk about there, that's a category that we refer to as schools, parks, generally non-rated. That's just that same thing in vertical form. So you can see the highs and lows. In forestry, we're only talking about 80 properties for forestry, but that's reflective of the government policy and plant more trees and demand for forestry. Once again, that's very much a national trend as well. So as far as most of the majority of your rating base is the residential sector, so capital value wise is 42%, followed by your dairy sector of 18%. But on the land value sector, this is what we're looking at currently, it's 28% on your dairy and pastoral and 39%. So what we would have found with the change in values, the shift in values from the rural sector more so into the residential sector, this will be part of what we'll be dealing with for your rates base. I won't talk too much on rates, I'm not the expert on rates or values, but these are the sorts of trends that are happening in your rating base. Once again, if you necessarily mean that your rates go up. The whole rateable value of the district is reduced the way that the council portions the rates. Right. The residential market, I mean, as I said, everybody expected that the residential market may go down significantly after COVID. What happened is when immediately after COVID, there was a complete lack of sales. Nobody really knew what's going to happen with the market. But it bounced back, and as everybody knows, in Australia, it's been a very, very strong residential market over the last year. So a lot of that growth is in lower land value laws, and typically it's in a 10 to 15% growth in house values, but with those that were in the lower entry level actually seeing the better increases. So what's driving the change? Well, we're now looking at like 2.5% mortgage interest rates, and money's cheap. There's not a lot on the market. The loan to value ratios, the government reduced about a year ago, although some of the banks are actually operating with those now, and there's an understanding that that will be achieved back into law in a couple of months' time, so that could affect the property market. But generally, it's pretty active. There's strong interest from first-time buyers. People are fighting to get in. There's this FOMO, this fear of missing out. Other things that are influencing the market is working from home. People are choosing to live where they want to live. If they can work, they don't have to be in an office, so they might be coming to places like South Canterbury, as opposed to having to be in a big city where they'd rather have the quality of life in a place like South Canterbury. So these are percentage changes. So what you see there is the areas that traditionally have been the lower values are generally seeing the greater percentage change. So your Tamika land values, significant increases, your Pleasant Point land values, significant increases, and round about the central Timaru Town and Timaru North also significant in those increases. Your higher price areas, still big dollar increases, but of course offer higher base, the percentage isn't so great. So that's just showing you what your average values are. So overall, we're looking at an average capital value of just 400,000. I see today that the latest New Zealand house price is $714,000. So your district's still affordable, it's desirable, and I'm not an economist, but I mean, it is an affordable location, so that does help keep those values high. Right, I might see Chris talk to the rural.
Rural. Valuation in rural is getting more and more complex. That's the big take home over the last sort of 5 to 6 years. Particularly the dairy sector, where we're not getting a great number of sales. So we get sales from outside the district. Obviously, there's a pretty good trend along the dairy properties. Obviously, a very restrictive environmental market. So any sort of environmental considerations being considered in the market, and they're having an effect on values. So nutrient baselines, your the requirements for a resource consent to farm, these are all developing and having an effect on the market. So we've generally, across all sectors, apart from forestry, we've had a reduction in value and land value. That forestry, just to put that into perspective, so you were looking for a very low dollars per hectare base rate on the land, and that's gone from, let's say, on average 3,000 to say 4,500. So it's still relatively a low value, but that demand for forestry is there. It's been seen nationally. And yeah, dairy has seen the largest decrease. Land value overall is just shy of 15%. There you go, there's all the different sectors broken down. Arable with a 8.6% land value reduction, and then dairy, as I said, 14.9. Pastoral a little less so, for 5.8. Horticulture, apples are to the right in Timaru, which is good. So that's a good news story there. Specialist livestock does shadow their lifestyle and pastoral somewhat, and as you can see, their forestry has gone down by 6%. Next one there, guys. Lifestyle market, again, it's just follow the residential and solid growth there at 8.7% on cattle values, and just over 10% on land value. And it has strengthened post-lockdown, which is again similar to most of the country. The highest value market is the Hadlow area. The average value now getting up towards that $1 million mark. The average land value just over 400,000. And Brendan, get property.
Yeah, so business properties, I guess the main driver there over the last 3 years has been, again, cheap money. People can't find not getting good return on investments in the bank. So we're looking for other investments like commercial property. That's basically the main driver there. Retail has been struggling a little bit, and that's a trend seen throughout the country. So that has been reflected in the valuations, particularly along Stephen Street. Because the earthquake-prone buildings has also been affected in Timaru, and then again, especially along 2nd Street. And with this new earthquake-prone building register coming to play now, that is now being reflected in these valuations. So you are seeing significant drops in the capital values if we had not had the earthquake-prone building reflected in the past. But in terms of land value, it has had the same effect. Overall, commercial industrial capital values have gone up about 10%, just shy of 10%. Land values have been a little bit higher. You'll notice here one of these bar groups does stand out quite a bit. That's for what we call Timaru Inner Central Sales Group. Industrial land value change is right up around 70–80%. That's basically due to a small number of properties in that area. We're talking Elizabeth Street, D Street, Western State Highline, and there was a number of sales in there which basically pointed to us the need to lift the land value quite significantly in that patch. Overall, there wasn't any other significant land value changes.
Just so that, oops. So obviously, yeah, that's just the growth. That's your overall value of your whole district, and it's good, positive, steady growth. So for a lot of districts, that 2014, 2017, pretty stable. We've actually seen over the last 6 years fairly steady overall growth, but just take into account this isn't just market growth, this just also includes your capital growth, new housing, new subdivision, and the like. I'd just like to point that it's not provisional dates, that's actually actual dates that we're running to. So once again, effective date 1st of September, so that's where the value level is stated to. The property owners are being mailed tomorrow, and they have until the 19th of March to dispute those values if they are not happy with that. So as far as they've got an objection process, so the dispute process, generally we get probably about 1.5% of people overall will dispute their values. Surprisingly enough, even though it is a value for taxation and rates, most people want their values increased, not decreased, which is people overseas want to pay for which I understand. The majority of objections are actually wanting the values increased. We deal with these by looking at sales around about the valuation date of 1 September, and we go back and we review each property and look to see if that value is correct. The view of actually completing these objections before the end of June, so that we complete before we strike. So the process is if all objections have to be received in writing. They could be on paper copy, or you will actually have paper objection forms at your front desk, but a majority we find now are being lodged online. It's the easiest way we can acknowledge those quickly. We all the information we provide. People can attach valuation reports, photos of their new kitchen, or such like. And we would prefer to actually do those online, but anything in writing is acceptable. So I think that's basically where we're at. So, do you want to have questions on that?
Yeah, great. Councillor Billington.
Thanks. And just in the earthquake-prone buildings, you've got those on the register that allows for this, as well as other properties considered high risk. So there's two questions there. If it's on the register as earthquake-prone, how do you go about revaluing it? You take a percentage of it.
Yeah, I mean, we look at what South's been doing throughout the year, basically. The way we kind of assess earthquake-prone buildings is obviously for income, or commercial industrial property, do an income approach. So you rental along the year. The way we typically analyse them is on an unaffected rental. So your rental as if the building was not earthquake-prone, having to see what it sold, what yield that represents, and we analyse this the properties based on that high yield. So instead of like a 7-8% yield, I'm talking like 18% plus for earthquake-prone building. I mean, we don't, it is an appraisal, we don't know the cost for each building, we're not engineers either, so that seems one kind of best fit, I guess, towards something as we get.
And what would the other properties be considered high risk?
I mean, it's not just properties on the earthquake-prone register, we do get, we send out regional surveys to building owners, and they will let us know if the building is considered earthquake-prone. And in the past, I mean, just looking at some buildings, if it looks like a earthquake-prone building, we will allow for it as well. But if it's on the register, it's, we know it really does need to be allowed for, so those ones probably have been hit harder.
Typically, a lot of places have got higher brick parapets under roofs. Main Street, we go to all sorts of properties. Just see even if they went in that register, just because that would be what the market would actually be looking at.
And it's nothing new either. The last 3 or 4 revaluations we have been considering earthquake-prone buildings to that extent, and now if it's your national register, we make sure we've got all those ones as well.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wills and then Councillor Booth.
I think you just answered my question here. Just prior to the register, so even when we're going out into the systems, you did take into consideration the state of the building and the rest that proposed, the component and or the solar later on. So that was always taken into consideration.
As best as we can.
And did you need people coming back at that time to challenge the valuation prior to the register of buildings?
And
I know you worked on a 1.1.5% on that, they come back and challenge over the valuation.
Yeah, we've had objections in the past. We've said that I thought it was earthquake-prone, and you can allow for it, so we can review it during the objection process.
Councillor Booth.
I assume that Tim North is washed iron.
Yes.
I just wondered why you don't actually have washed iron, because it's actually quite a significant area on in its own.
That's just for enhance the sales routes, isn't it? I'm not sure.
Was that come under the rules too?
Yeah.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Just one question for me. The rural trend with a slight decrease, that's nationwide, is it?
It is, yes, yeah. I think it'd be even, I should say that, larger potentially, and further north we go next year. But yeah, that's consistent with.
Brilliant. Thank you. Really appreciate that, Chris, Brendan and Garth. Really interesting, and I'm sure the general public will be very interested as well. The next couple of days as they get their valuations come out, and they'll all jump to the conclusion that the rates are going to go up accordingly or down. That is not the case. Not yet. So thanks, team. Appreciate that. And we've just got to receive a note that report, so I can either move that. Councillor Parker, Councillor Gilchrist, put the motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Yes. Gary. Thank you. And thanks, team. Really appreciate the work. might bring the lights up.
Yep.
A little bit moody, isn't it? Thanks, Joey. Alrighty, now 9.4, back in team to draft business improvement district policy. Don?
Thank you, and I just want to welcome Heather, who's a consultant who's worked with me on developing this policy. So I just wanted to clarify first up that the purpose of today is not to approve the business improvement district or approve a targeted rate. What we're looking at here is an initial draft of a policy that will become an enabling policy. So once it's approved, it will be enable groups who want to look to form a bid, group, a business improvement district themselves, to start that process and apply for a bid if they can get sufficient mandate within their area to do so. So this is really just a policy that enables that rather than actually approving a bid or a target rate today. So I might just hand over to Mark to start to introduce some of the work, what is a bid, and sort of the high-level policy that's being proposed.
Thanks, Donna. We first started constructing the Business Improvement District policy some months ago following initial consultation and engagement with the Central Business District group, who expressed a willingness and desire to progress with an initiative that would essentially lead to a partnership arrangement between council and a bid proposer in terms of identifying specific projects that weren't already being delivered by council, but would enable an alignment with and in accord with council's strategic objectives, particularly around business district development, and that could be areas of beautification or mentoring development, training, collective marketing, and the like. So in terms of the process, we looked at the business improvement district policies that are currently in operation in Auckland City, Wellington City, and Christchurch City, just to give some coverage of the country. And given that each of those cities have been operating very successful bid programs, in Auckland's case since 2011, and in Christchurch's case for the last 10 years also, as is Wellington. In terms of the structure of the policy, as Donna pointed out, it is an enabling policy, so it's not a document or an agreement by council today which says we will in fact engage in a bid with a particular group. It's simply a framework which allows the mechanics of that requirement to be implemented or effective as it becomes appropriate to do so. Clearly, there's a huge amount of consultative work required between a bid operator and the business district that it's liaising with or engaging with, and that's part of the bid requirement. So this process identifies the governance structures, the operating structures, and the parameters around which council may consider a bid. It doesn't actually require council to consider a bid or a bid project. It simply enables that framework for council to consider options and initiatives that are presented to it in a very robust and detailed way, and in which council has a very direct engagement with through the entire process, both at a pre-evaluation stage, but also at a post-evaluation stage and ongoing funding perspective and point of view. There are a number of possibly contentious points in this document that council will need to give thought to, and that's around how it considers the appetite for a bid from ratepayers versus occupiers, given that there's potentially a large, and typically a large proportion of non-occupier owners to properties. So what we tend to find around the country is that bids are very initially promoted by the occupier group, but that has to come with hand-in-hand support from the owner forum and the owner group as well. areas for consideration certainly around voting thresholds, and there are some very rigorous voting parameters and thresholds that are associated or aligned with the bid. We have a target of a bid establishment level of being typically around 25% of owners being in support of the establishment of a bid. If we look at similar bid structures, the Wellington policy requires an initial agreement from 25% of those owner-occupiers, and we'll talk about the owner-occupier conundrum in a moment, but typically a commitment from around 25% of those who will directly be impacted by the bid structure. Auckland is similar. Auckland's policy requires 25% of initial support in favour of a bid, and that also comes with a requirement as voting is enacted that there's a 50% majority of return votes. So 25% must return a vote, and 50% of that 25% returned representing a majority. Christchurch's case is a little more onerous. It requires 50% of votes and support of a bid structure, and with 66% of those votes returned being in favour of a bid. Auckland's, as I said, is a 25% voting support and a majority of those in support of any bid establishment or ongoing bid change or bid structure. The bid framework allows for a number of different rating mechanisms to be used depending on the target audience that's subject to the bid. And the bid policy has been structured initially to deal with the interest from the Central Business District group of Timaru Township, but also to deal with any future bid interest or future bid requirements from, say, smaller township initiatives. And that could be Geraldine, Temuka, Washdyke, and that requirement to have a flexible rating requirement, which is agreed by council at the time of any bid agreement, and certainly needs to be signed off by you at any future bid agreement, is to allow that flexibility in terms of the composition of owner-occupiers, differential in terms of land value versus capital value, and the like. As I said, the objective of a bid is around the improvement of a district. And as we know, we have, as council, we have an obligation to deliver services and to make sure that our levels of service are certainly affordable and delivered in line with our consultative arrangements. The bid allows us to extend that into a much more partnership-based approach with those who will be directly impacted by the financing and funding of a bid. And that's to ensure that they have the responsibility and accountability to actually ensure that they have solidly worked through their engagement protocols and processes in terms of demonstrating to council that there is a majority or certainly a huge appetite to explore a bid. And then to go about resourcing it, funding it, reporting on it, and delivering it in such a way that requires resources that could ordinarily be rather onerous to council and probably fall outside council's mandate and scope of service delivery anyway. We do need to be quite conscious that any bid development is very closely aligned with council's strategic objectives and frameworks, and that comes with a close examination of the intent of a bid and the delivery of that bid around council's current plans, but also intended plans. The governance functions and framework for the bid delivery again put council very much in control of monitoring it, ensuring that the resources are in place to continue the successful delivery of a bid system and a bid structure. I would hope that largely the contents of the policy are self-explanatory. As I've said, it has been constructed on the basis of a hybrid between the Auckland, the Wellington and the Christchurch policies, which have been in operation for the past 10 years or so, and have been proving, based on discussions with those councils, to be very successfully engaged by the business community and engaged by the public in terms of allowing council to deliver or to aid council in delivering services and initiatives in the business districts that otherwise would not have been possible. Thank you. Happy to answer questions.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Just in regards, you made comment about making references to Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch. Has there been anything else on a similar scale to the district of Timaru that you've been able to make some comparisons on an equitable basis?
I was going to mention Tauranga, but I don't think that's a good example to use at the moment, so I probably won't. No, I don't have direct information extracted from any other similar township to Timaru at my fingertips, but I can get that. I do know that that the bid process is certainly gaining favour, and those three examples that I have used are in addition to the likes of Whangarei, for instance, but those three examples are one which most other towns and cities are looking to as exemplars in terms of functionality, form and delivery.
Once again, you'll be using the comparison from the larger cities for the smaller places like Wanganui as the bench model.
Oh, look, I guess to put that in perspective, we look at Auckland as an option. Auckland actually manages 50 bids around its jurisdiction. So if we look at each individual ward of Auckland, and there are 23 local boards that that comprise Auckland, each of those are possibly representative of a township or a small city the size of Timaru. So while we say they're large metropolises, the fact that they look at bids in a very discreet and a very town-centred like approach is similar to the way both the Timaru Central Business District, but also a township such as Washdyke or Temuka or Geraldine would actually begin to frame up their bid approach as well. So while it's true, it's modelled on a largish scale urban population, the actual delivery of the bids in those populations are quite confined and quite condensed based on smaller townships and smaller hubs.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Booth.
I'm just wondering how many bids there are now in the country, and perhaps a typical levy amount.
Oh, so as I said, the actual stats I have from Auckland, we've spoken to them very recently, is that they're currently managing 50 bids. And that's been consistent for about the last 7 years. Typically, they would look at a bid in the order of about $120,000 to $150,000, and per discrete project and per discrete package. But those are all assessed by council at the time a bid is proposed, and that, along with the duration of the bid, it could be multi-years, for instance. The resources that are required of it and the follow-up assessment of the delivery of that bid are all important factors in terms of the assessment of that.
Just in terms of the numbers, you're saying 25% gets it over the line, and then half of that. I'm just a bit concerned 13 out of 100 business owners could make a decision on behalf of the bid. It just seems quite a low number if you go with that. Have there been any controversies around bids because of those low numbers actually participating?
Not that I've uncovered at this stage. I guess if we use Christchurch as an example, Christchurch actually requires a 50% commitment to both initiate a bid and in terms of any voting, with 66% of that 50% needing to be in favour of that for it to succeed. So the Christchurch threshold is a lot higher than both Auckland and Wellington's. Auckland haven't reported directly. Auckland have a team who manages their bid process. There are about half a dozen people in that team. They haven't reported any issues or challenges with the requirement of that 25% threshold. And again, as part of the initiation of the bid structure, the 25% threshold or higher is the responsibility essentially of the bid proposer to ensure that they garner that consultation and they ensure that they've got the commitment from a substantial portion of those who will be affected before they even bring it to council. So there must be the proof and the demonstration of that proof before they come to council with that as an option, and for which council will then assess that interest. So perhaps it might be a low threshold, but neither of those parties have actually had any issue, it would seem, with a 25% threshold as being too low.
Yes, Councillor Puddington, and that's something that would come out of the consultations with those numbers as well. Donna, anything else for us?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of the policy, there are 4 or 5 matters that we've reckoned it, I guess, now to get a bit of a steer from what they want to take it, recognising that even when it's approved today, if it's approved, it will be approved as a draft. Consultation will be further submissions invited on that, or feedback invited. But as Mark said, we just wanted to make it clear that what's being proposed is the method for apportioning values based on the capital value rather than the land value, the capital value probably being more representative of the size of the activity relative to the neighbour. Also, we've got options in the paper for the voting threshold, sort of at 2 extremes, one which is a 50% support, other being 50% of the 25% vote in return. So that's something that we need a bit of direction on in terms of council's views on that. Also, the assistance we're working around once somebody's got a bid and they want to apply, continue it going for subsequent years. Was there a restriction on how that might be able to grow? And we suggested a 10% lid on increases on the bid, and that's otherwise agreed. And then also who does the voter eligibility sit with, doesn't sit with the occupier, and though there is a requirement for significant engagement, often be driven by the occupier, only the ratepayer. The ratepayer is really the proper person to be on the voting register. We think, but that again, go out and draft policy and then consultation.
Sorry, just to add to that, Donna, too, in terms of the differential between occupier and owner, a requirement of this process is to gather the data of both council's database in terms of the rateable owner or the rated owner versus the occupier, and the reason the occupier becomes so critical is that we do expect the bid proponent to be ensuring that there's sufficient engagement between and with the occupier and owner to ensure that that what they're proposing is in fact supported by both sides. It is also possible for a business owner, in the case of Christchurch's policy, to actually delegate their voting rights to the occupier, but there's a requirement for that to be confirmed up front, and that then maintains the life of that bid. So it doesn't alter and change from one to the other.
So John, do you want some guidance on those?
Yeah, so the first one would be views on using the capital value as a basis.
Because I think capital value makes sense, does reflect the nature of the business and the market. So taking into account so sign up to that. And then next is
So the next one is the voting threshold. In the paper we've got 50% or 25% or 50%, 25% in turn with 50% of those in favour. And we heard from Mark, there are some options between that, such as the Christchurch example, or 50% return at 60. This is, you know, at the high end, we've got, you know, it needs to establish really strong support, and at the same time, it's quite a high threshold and could be prohibitive, and then the other end is that going to provide sufficient comfort to council, so indeed, Mark.
No, I think that covers it. I guess as I said earlier, the 25% threshold appears to be satisfying the requirements of other councils, and what we'd expect to find with very thorough engagement between both occupier and owner, and particularly where a bid is universally appealing, and you would certainly expect it to be, that 25% is merely a stated threshold, and you would expect to see something much greater than that in terms of commitment from occupiers around the benefit and value proposition that's been delivered from a bid.
Councillor Wills.
Thank you. I just have concerns. I just think 25% is actually too low. Again, we're making comparisons to the larger centres, and I'm worried that, you know, we may not have a buy-in from across all interested parties, and I like to see that we're going to actually think it'll be a lot higher.
Thanks, Councillor Wills. Councillor Lyon.
Thank you. Look, I absolutely concur. I think it's far too low a level to enter into it at 25%, because the reality is that it will trigger activity and expense on behalf of council to get involved, and it would leave potentially frivolous, claims or expectations, that we could spend a lot of time on as a council working them through. For a small percentage of that grouping, and I think we would want to cover ourselves by having a larger percentage. I'm not saying what, but certainly more than 25%. It's just, to me, it's madness, because you still have individuals and small groupings that will create a lot of activity and expense for other reasons. So maybe the 50, but because it's just open to manipulation, I believe.
Thank you, Councillor Lyon. Councillor Whittington.
Just a point of clarification, a commercial lease at the moment you pay outgoings, which is rates and insurance back. Where does the bid sit? I mean, is that on?
The bid is a targeted rate levied against the property, so it sits as an outgoing expense.
The building owner will pass it on to the lessee.
I would expect that would be the case, and that generally is the case with most bids, yes.
So I think that generally speaking, yes, but then the lease is negotiable, so that might have been another lease, but would ordinarily expect to see it as an outcome.
Thank you. Councillor Booth.
Yeah, thank you. I guess what it tends to do is that people who are not engaged, it actually forces them to be engaged. So people sitting there doing nothing, they are generally the reason why nothing gets done, because they just don't show up and they don't do anything. But if they're forced to do something, actually they will start to get involved to try and help, because they're paying. So, and I can only imagine that it will be the occupier who is in the business who will be, it'll be part of their outgoings that will pay it. So, from that point, I can't see why we would want to reinvent or reorg. It's really done around the world and even throughout New Zealand. At 25% and a majority of that, as I say, if they want to get involved in something like this is happening, they'll show up and buy it. So,
thanks, Councillor Whittington. Councillor.
If I just may, just in regards to, I suppose, the engagement level, what concerned me earlier on was just the figure being thrown out there around, I think one of the districts had, you say about 8 people representing the bid process, working behind the scenes with the council, is that correct?
Oh, so sorry, I missed the first part of that question. Was that around the number of people managing bids from council's perspective? In Auckland, the numbers in Auckland are approximately 6 FTEs who manage the whole bid process, but they do sit within the ratings team, so they do have other responsibilities as well. But that's to manage 60 bids over the last 10 years, and that number will potentially increase this year.
Okay, so even with that there taken into consideration, there certainly be a cost overlay for the Pymble District Council ratepayers to go through this process of successful as well. Extra added costs through the process that they're not there.
I guess there's certainly a resource requirement from council in terms of the governance, the monitoring, and the establishment of the bid. There's a requirement, of course, to ensure that the targeted rate is collected and it is transferred to the bid operator as a normal part of business. I guess in terms of the governance and the operative requirements that sit with that, the bid operator actually has and is required to have through a mandate rather onerous reporting requirements and transparency requirements around its project delivery. And the project delivery, of course, covers its financial delivery with that. So most of the onus, given that it's a shareholding, I guess, between both council and the bid operator, essentially sits with the bid operator. Council's requirement are very much around the monitoring of that from a governance perspective, and the ongoing assurance that the funds that it's collecting on behalf of business owners, bar occupiers, is in fact being apportioned and used as it has been committed to be used.
Okay, thank you. And I don't see any major issues with that. We've got, a role that's been established that will be a part of ETA in regard to city help. So I see some linkage in there. So yeah, that's it. It's concerned it's probably more with the establishment of the bid itself. So we need to move forward. So what's the feeling in the room around the numbers? Are we sitting at the high level, are we sitting at the low level? Into account, it's a down level thing. So
Well, I think enablement, not disablement either.
do we have a contact?
Well, I'd be happy to move it as the recommendation at 25%, and even if that's goes out for consultation.
Sorry, we did have Councillor Wills on the mic first, so it wasn't the motion. So Councillor Wills first, and then Councillor.
Yeah, I'd be quite comfortable 40-50% somewhere around that figure.
Through the chair, may I make just another comment on that, and maybe I wasn't clear. In terms of the initial bid establishment, what would be advisable or recommended is a typical rate, because we're not actually asking council to commit to that at this point, because each bid is going to be assessed on its own merits and based on its own geography and its own location and its own makeup and composition. In some cases, you actually may find that that your risk appetite in a particular precinct or environment might require you to have a 60% threshold. Because all of your business owners, occupiers are of a like composition and a like mix. In other aspects, it may be that 25% will garner it, because you know that the appetite from the occupiers will drive that interest back to the owners. So what we look for in that regard is typically a 25% or typically a 50% interest shown by the bid proposer to gain interest. It doesn't necessarily lock you down to that, because those metrics are very much decided by council at the receipt and at the assessment of each of those bids.
So the policy reflects some flexibility. That's what I'm hearing. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So we're comfortable with that.
Yeah, so just to be clear, so we've got on page 54 of the policy, we've got two options there, which is sorry, 13 of the policy is what you were questioning.
Oh, 13 in policy, yeah. So what I would suggest would be something more akin to option B in that regard.
Yeah, so we can do that and provide some specific questions as a part of the consultation.
Okay, everyone comfortable with that? Yeah, thank you. What's the next one for you, Don?
So the next item was we're just going to include a 10% sort of lid on year after.
Yep.
So always
Yeah. You're comfortable with that? Cool.
And then the last one was just at the stage where we're going out as the owner would be the voter in this no mechanism kicked in such a delegation.
They're building on, you see?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting. In fact, that it's going to be the business owner realistically pay the bill. So I think that's, and probably likely to be more engaged in the whole process, drive voter turnout as well, because you could actually get lower voter turnout if you're just targeting the building owner, whereas my thoughts would be you want to target businesses. So it would make sense in my mind that it is more tenant driven.
So I think it's just coming from the ability of who their rights of recovery are against
Yeah.
the council. So what's that?
Any comments, thoughts, Steve? Yep, Councillor Booth.
Yeah, I guess the tenant's probably going to drive it with the landlord. I mean, this really is in the landlord's interest that he's got an engaged tenant. And if they're coming to him and saying, well, let's improve the situation, it's got to be good for everyone involved.
Yeah, I do see it as a risk of if we're talking about neighbourhood of lower voter turnout, so we don't move forward, but otherwise we're comfortable with that. Personally, I see that as a risk.
Is that a risk, Martin?
A risk between owner and occupier, I think there needs to be clearly two recognised strands there. One, as I said earlier, I would expect that the occupiers will be the ones driving the initial initiation of a bid. The owners clearly will have the impact in the first instance of a targeted rate, which logically will be on charged or through charge to the occupier. In terms of voting, I'd probably be more comfortable with the owner having the voting rights in the first instance, because the owner is one less likely to be transient in this relationship. So having the ownership right, unless in fact they intend or purposefully delegate that voting right to another person who may in fact be the occupier. But I think that it's quite clear that because council's relationship in the first instance, and the only instance really, is with the rated party being the owner, then the rated party should be the one who is the voter.
Just a point of clarification, if I own 10 buildings in the main street, I get 10 votes?
If you have 10 rateable units, you have 1 vote per rateable unit.
Okay, thanks. I think that's everyone's comfortable with that. I think it's a building owner. That's got all your questions answered, Donna, as far as moving forward?
Yeah, and then just the last thing was really just the approach to consultation. So the question over the standard policy itself require consultation. I think we're sort of leaning on the side of going out and doing consultation around it. I propose a new 3-week consultation period. What we think we would like to do is actually bundle it into the RTP consultation, so it's not just sort of confuse various consultation issues on at any time as another issue, not a big issue as another issue within that document, so we can deal with it that way. And then get a policy, assuming that if it goes through, you can get a policy in place for a bid proposer to come into year 2 of the long-term plan with an application.
Okay, I would be supportive of that. I think it's key that although, potentially a first bid is likely to be Timaru CBD, we've still got to be mindful of where bid can be used. As an example, and so if we're having full district consultation, it sort of makes sense. So I'm comfortable with that. Everyone else comfortable with that? Yeah, cool. And gives the opportunity for those to drive the conversation that need to. Brilliant. So covered, basis covered. So as far as the recommendation, go to page 38. 1, 2, 3. Is everyone comfortable with where we sit on that? Move it for those. That's the vote. Councillor Gilchrist, put the motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thanks, Donna, and thanks, Mark. We appreciate the work on that.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you.
I'm just conscious of time for the agenda. We might just bring forward, sorry, so one moment, please. Just consideration of the public forum item around East trading. So I'll just read just briefly talk about 2 options around that.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the council has it's noted that the honest payment policy in place. That policy does have to be reviewed within 5 years, which is at the end of next year. So you've got an option, I think, realistically, for a review of that policy before this is the next one. That's not likely. You've got an option of reviewing it, bringing forward the review to contemplate the review for next Easter, or in the ordinary course of events, and low might be able to tell the ordinary course of events is probably going to come out in the middle of next year. And on a cyclical basis, 5 years. So you've got that as an option. And before you make a decision, you may wish to have officers go away and come back and just do a bit of work. We do know, for instance, that there are other councils, such as the Togo, Central Otago, Marlborough, Brisbane and so on, and policy is very similar to ours. There may be others, so we're not alone. So you may wish us to just come back with some advice and put before you some more options about whether you wish to have that review be available to you, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. So, questions in and around that? Does anyone have specific direction? No. So, yeah, so based on that, I'm comfortable with us and taking into account Roger's submission today, comfortable for us to get some more information. I think we were always unlikely to achieve anything if there was a change before this Easter, probably more around workload from some of the staff. And with that, once we consider those options, I think we've got plenty of time to potentially review that before Easter next year, so it could be worth for 1 year effectively. So I'll stay in touch with Roger around the information that council officers provide to us, and then timings from there. So comfortable with that? Okay, cool. Okay, thank you. So now we move to, move now to Simon and some of the other team members will be joining us in regard to 9.5, which is the Agintoa section extension on page 6.
Afternoon all. Welcome to Cara and Hamish. So just a little bit of background for today. The House Gallery, the original House Gallery, was confirmed as proceeding with the Earthquake Strengthening Project. Today's discussion is around 1978-95 extensions. The report goes through, provides quite a bit of background in terms of the activity to date. Just to recap, a feasibility study was conducted outlining a range of 8 different options of how to treat the 78-95 extension, right through to demolishing the lot and starting fresh and building again, through to relocating the site and a range of various refurbishment options. Feedback from that, and in October's Community Services Committee, Council chose to proceed with options 4, 5 and 6 through to long-term plan consultation document. Get a bit of detail in that space for you. Today is about nominating the preferred options. In the consultation document, Council needs to nominate which option it prefers to propose. And accordingly, we need to make sure that the appropriate budget is allocated for that. Option 4, essentially remaining as is, and we'll look at developing an off-site storage facility, cost of anywhere up to 2 million into the space, partial refurbishment of the site that we've got here, and also developing off-site storage, 2.2, or full redevelopment, so demolition of what is currently there and rebuild, cost of upwards to 8. So another range of options that we've got here, and really just looking for nomination of the preferred option.
Thanks, Simon. Now questions? Councillor.
Sorry, so just to catch up on this, one of the options, and look, I don't sit either way, but we're looking at a city hub strategy, maybe spending millions of dollars in the future. We've got a cultural, I guess, precinct we're building at the south end of town. I think one of the options going to the public in general, not just the stakeholders, should be considered whether a new gallery is built as part of that cultural hub. We've already said we're going to save the House Gallery, but there are other options. And I just, when we're going to the public in general, whether that should also be an option then that we're saying, let's bring people to the inner city. I guess that's my thought.
That's cool. Thanks, Councillor Clinton. We'll go to Councillor Booth. What we might do is just direct questions to the team, and then we can move any debate once the motion's been moved either way, just to tick all the boxes. Sorry, Councillor Whittington, can you jump out? And,
sorry.
No, you're right. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so confirming you put a price tag of 3 to 3.3 on the House Gallery, which is a category A, is that right? And category B. So really sort of, you just can't knock that around. Basically, we've got to do that, haven't we? And then thereafter, you were talking about to update and rebuild or replace the other part. You're talking about another 5.5 to 6.5 on top of that.
Up to, depending on the option, if it's demolished and rebuilt, it's up to 8.
So what's this number here at 5.5? Rebuild of the 1978 to 95 extension.
So that was the options that went through to the committee in October, and that was option 6. And since then, further information has come in, more accurate data around what the local cost is going to be.
So just to clarify those numbers, in October, they were physical build only, and they were excluding consultancy and legal fees and other costs and GST, so that was why that's cost there. So the total project cost we're suspecting is around 8 million.
Plus the house.
Plus the house on top of that.
And is that pretty much a big area, and does it take into consideration the extra storage required as well?
The option number 6 that you're looking at there outlines extra storage, workspace, education, and community space, and proposes to be split across 2 levels. So the land footprint remains largely the same, and within the confines of the deed, we increase the square metre between the site.
So at the very minimum, we could do just the house, and then until we actually get further down the road with the family, to see what we can do, that could be another stage at a later date.
Yes. So that would be your option number 4, which is essentially remain as is. There is some operational pressures on space and storage. That's something that we would need to look at some point in the very near future. But the range of options exists from doing nothing right through to
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
So we start just with the houses and discuss, and then we're talking about $1.2 million for site storage, correct? And capacity would be, is that going to be future-proofing that as well?
yeah, we talked 15 to 20 years worth of future-proof storage.
And then would you have to have a particular specialised vehicle or vehicles to transport it? And then you build all those costs in that 1.2 million.
Pointing out is that the existing facility has a number of issues with it, and that includes access to public facilities, apartments, for example. So those types of issues and items that we need to address at some stage in the future.
So if you were to go down and have a look at option number 6, and we're now talking about figures up around $8 million, has there been any discussion around some form of private plus government funding? And is there some sort of a baseline that gives you some sort of comfort that if you went to that bigger model, you get that financial support for the community as a whole, for a large group?
Yeah, so Hamish is busy in the process of doing funding applications right at the moment. So while we need to look at it from a total project cost perspective for 2 projects, we can apply for funding for each project in that space. The intent behind this is we have a third funding model with that to ensure that we meet the criteria for any central or agency funding. We council need to be able to underwrite any at-risk funding arrangements. So those funds that we anticipate from community funding arrangements, so council would need to underwrite those, which is what we put into the current LTP budget if that option was selected. But the intent is that the community fundraising major contribution.
So with your site building we're talking about at 1.2, would that be a purpose-built building, or would that be an existing building you could actually do up and improve or create education spaces, or purely and simply look at just the storage?
Do you want to talk to that? Yes, you looked at a couple of different options.
Yeah, so we've looked at a whole range of options when it comes to storage. The option that we put there at 1.2 is to retrofit a building in the CBD. We see that as probably the most cost-effective option at this stage. The other options we have looked at is a new build. Again, that would be a bigger cost. So we see the retrofitting of a historic building in the CBD.
You haven't had any of like promo.
Well, let's get that 1.2.
So I'm just throwing that out, because go to the CBD, yeah, but
Yeah.
this is around okay. Probably looks
We have considered that.
I suppose it says a community, you know, do we have an appetite to go 3.5, then another say $8 million, especially some of the big projects we've got on the agenda at the moment coming up in the long-term plan, which are funded. I must be leaning slightly towards Councillor Piddington about, do we have some sort of community engagement around this? And go, what is that real appetite for us around another project?
We will keep, we're going to be good councillors and we're going to keep to questions. So thank you. We're going to save debate. We're going to do it this one time. We're going to do it the right way. I live in hope. Right. Question from me before I go to Councillor Booth. In regard to Councillor Piddington's comment around new build, CBD, whatever that looks like, as far as the third funding, is that likely to be achievable with a new build versus some of the funding, grants that you might be able to get with more heritage, existing facilities? Would those funding streams be at risk?
Yes, so through the feasibility study that was undertaken by a government group, they see that the funding is feasible, that there's a model for what they can build of the extension.
Of that extension. And so would that be likely to be third if we did a new build to Councillor Piddington's point, similar? Okay. Thank you, Councillor Booth.
We have already consulted with the stakeholders, which have been the art fraternity, which was quite a strong turnout actually back in October, which is noted in the minutes. And it's obviously the fact is that we've got a unique facility managed. It's one of the few garden art galleries in the country. It's got the fifth most expensive art collection, which is actually all locked up in a storage room. And we've got a heritage building which is there. And really it's our responsibility. It's been ours for a number of years, and we need it's something that we should do. Well, we're getting off track here. We are with this whole thing. What if these people already done the work? These are the recommendations. That's what we need to consider.
Yeah. Okay. So if you want to come back in line and move a particular motion, you can. We'll go to Councillor Gilchrist for your question, and then to Councillor Lyon.
So it is even a question. I was just curious, with option 5, which is some partial refurbishment, you said earlier that there are problems with access for all of the community and building currently. So would option 5 address that, or is option 6 the only one that would actually make it accessible for everyone and the facilities suitable?
Yes, it would address it. Yes, it would address it, but we start to get into similar situations. We have experience with the library where we might expand the life of that building another 10, maybe 15 years. We can spread it a bit more. At some point, we're going to need to make a decision about long term what we're going to do. And in conjunction with that, we still need to consider storage, but it will resolve the immediate accessibility issues.
Thank you.
Thanks. We'll move to Councillor Lyon, and then I think that the two things we're considering is obviously preferred item is the major thing we're trying to achieve today. Preferred item to go through to LTP, not to say that we're exclusive of any other options that may or may not be a preferred option. So we'll go to Councillor Lyon.
Thank you, Worship. And just the $8 million option to build is a 2-story building. Is that what we say on site? As long as it's on the footprint that the storage area is other older galleries not treated. Okay. Well, thank you. That's all.
Thanks. Councillor Lyon. Councillor Booth.
So just in line with that, there was some discussion last time. How feasible is it going to be to build a 2-story building that's sympathetic to that environment and that existing building, and have it so that it, you know, it actually complements that environment.
Yeah, so there's a lot of challenges in that, and the scope needs to be actually fit and sympathetic with that. We've obviously got heritage involved as well, and we need to be resource requirements, and that's part of it as well. Hamish has had some further conversations, I don't know if you want to add something to that.
Yes, I can add that we are working with the heritage architect who is looking at how that extension would fit with the current heritage building, and they're working with the architect around that as well. So there's a lot of considerations around that, and that also goes through things like resource consent and building consent process as well. We are also consulting with heritage consent as well around how that building would complement that heritage building. But through the heritage redevelopment that we're doing and the conservation of the heritage building, we're actually restoring the house to its original, as close as we can. And the Heritage New Zealand is a big part. I see that as a benefit through the process. So they're quite positive around that process.
So it's right to say that we're balancing up the feasibility of potentially having access to more funds because of that particular uniqueness against the fact that that's going to cost significantly more than a rebuild that doesn't actually have to blend into that environment.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Riley, and sorry, Councillor Oliver, just chip in if you need to. Forget the optimist side. So, Councillor Riley.
Thank you, Your Worship. The question I have is, if you've done up the gallery, and as it is, and having another part of the art gallery and displays in another building somewhere else, like downtown, you're looking at, would it function running an art gallery having the two separate properties? Could you?
Yeah, so we've got temporary exhibition space with an access to the Heritage Hub and museum and gallery work in conjunction with that. Yes, that means that we could potentially have a duplication of operational areas, but for the Heritage Hub, the intent behind it is temporary exhibition space for those large shows, exhibitions that we wouldn't normally be able to house.
But as a long term, having that part of the art gallery down is a permanent fixture, and having, I know it's two facilities. I'm just thinking of using not being able to use the house and not use that.
So potentially you could do the work on the house, do some refurbishment in the extension to make good, and have another site for exhibition displays on a permanent basis. I'm not 100% sure on the value add proposition versus the increase in operating costs, what they look like. I can't recall what was explored through the facility and restricted work that Stephen did on that topic.
Not that option that didn't come up through the feasibility study.
Yeah,
they saw one option was to relocate the gallery to a site somewhere else.
Yes,
but there was discounted as feasible
because of the building,
because of the historic
house.
Yeah, and because the stakeholder from the gallery to remain on the site.
Cool. Thank you. Councillor Booth, any further questions, or happy to take move it?
Okay, just how much extra storage do you require over and above what you've got there for say the next 20 years?
So currently we've got 90 square metres of storage. We're looking at about 300 square metres.
And did you do a concept or price range concept of a single story instead of a replacement, but single story?
We did look at a single story, but because of the limitations of the trustee, we are limited to how far we can extend it to the property.
I think on that point, sorry, just to add to it, I think on that point is the value add wouldn't be there because you just essentially replacing like knowledge to add extra storage space.
One further thing I can add also with the addition of the upper story and new extension, the rationale for that is that we can put the lift in the new extension and create a walkway into the historic house gallery. And that means we don't have to put a lift in the historic house. So there is a bit of a design reason for that as well.
Cool. And I guess, through this process, we're putting, money to the budget, and we're still having conversations with the family. And so, there may be tweaks to, options potentially on site that we don't currently have, but we do need to keep an open mind to that. Councillor Park, have you got a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to flip to Councillor Park for the question.
A very quick
Because I
question.
think Councillor Wills is going to.
So with all these costs, we need to add 1.2 for storage on each of these, correct? So each of these costs, it says development off-site storage, but each of them, so we add 1.2 million onto each of these threes and 11s.
So total across the two projects, we're looking at 12 million in total, and it includes all storage, and that is the gold-plated version of number 6.
Yeah, so that for number 4, it's 3 to 3.3 plus an extra 1.2. Yeah. So that's not included in his. So everything's kind of,
We need to host the Prime Minister again, don't we? Councillor Wills.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. I'm quite happy to move option 6, taking into consideration that this is such an integral part and this building part of our fabric of our society. I think we need to move something, have something that long-term plan, future proofing, and I'm quite happy to move option 6.
Exciting.
Got it, grab it.
Option 6, so we're going to move seconder. Yeah, right. Comfortable with that? Put the motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Fantastic. So is there any, conscious about the date and varying things there, is there any, anything else that anyone would like to move, just so we are well covered? No, everyone's comfortable with that? Councillor Booth was just a little bit sharp on the
I'd like to see progressed through the family as to investigate and take action on the deed to enable us to use more site and take that into consideration when we do it.
Well, I don't think we necessarily need to move anything to that, but I think that the team are very conscious and we need to, where possible, share that. Councillor Park.
Thank you. I was just following on what Councillor Clinton said at the very beginning. I feel like we haven't kind of tied that up. So we've got the 3 options with our preferred option now. Do we add in the 4th option of relooking at it, putting it out to the public? Is that on the table for this council? Back out as part of the 81 option. No, in the LTP. So you've got your 3. At the moment, we've got 3 options for our preferred one. Do we add it? We have 4 options, but we're out
Into a motion and we could try it out.
Okay, so I'd like to put a motion forward that for the long-term plan for the Argentine Art Gallery, that we add a 4th option to go about regarding stating
We will see these.
yeah, for the Argentine Art Gallery to be considered as part of the new cultural centre.
Just to, I guess,
Still keep the house.
Yeah.
We're still the house, but then still with that.
So 2 hours or 1?
Was it on Joe? Sorry, that's my.
Yeah, you're meeting with the Heritage Centre, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, I have. Fourth option regarding with a new build as part of the cultural centre, retaining the original.
Yeah, this is as a fourth option that we talked about.
Councillor. Thank you. Motion is on the floor. Councillor Billy.
I'll second that. I just think it just lets people aware that we look at the full spectrum of options. If the mood around the table is reflected in the community, it won't matter, but who knows? All I'm saying is we're spending a lot of money on the CBD. We're committed to spend 50 odd million in the next 10 years. So it should be at least an option.
So just before I put the motion to the floor or any further debate, so obviously there's ramifications of that decision probably based around existing spend on house and those sorts of things as well, because then will be demolition of existing art gallery. You know, there is quite a bit to it. And costing wise, we would have to obviously get a indicative cost. But have you put the motions there? So yes, you can. Thanks.
So essentially we're talking about its option 8, which is including the art gallery into the Heritage Hub. In doing so, we also need to say the electricity quality for the city. Or is it a separate add-on?
Separate add-on. We're too far down the track. But we have other land there.
Okay, well, any other debate around that?
Unfortunately, no. So the motion really asking for another option. Yeah, another option. Yeah, asking to judge destroying the house, leaving it there because it's been done, following everything else that's there, and moving to a new site. Right. It's interesting.
We're asking for consultation.
Seems pretty dead cost if we just do something like that right now. It's unbelievable.
Oh, look, I don't think it's unbelievable. I think it's the good testing with the community. Because the question is, and they will have sort of consultation, is have you considered a new site, a new building? I guarantee you will get a question from lots of people. So I think it's it is good to consider any. Councillor Lewis.
It almost brings up, I suppose, the discussion debate when we initially looked at the CBA and the replacement of the school, that type of business. So just going there.
Sorry, you were speaking in regard to full options. Yes. Yeah. Any other debate before we put the motion to the floor?
So the motion that we passed previous to this.
Yeah, that's still that preferred. So yeah, that endures, so that would be preferred option still. This would be an additional option for consultation. I think we just say that we've considered all options, please.
So we take 4 out rather than 3.
Yes.
Effectively.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just a fourth option that people can say yay or nay to.
And we've still got to make a decision.
Correct.
You don't have a decision away from us, still got to make a decision.
Okay, so I think any other further debate? No, put the motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. We might just still raise our hands. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Yeah, against.
Against. Noted, please.
Yep. Yeah. Noted. Cool, thank you. So that wraps that up. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, team. And noting that it is still the preferred option.
Absolutely.
We are just going to take 5 minutes until we welcome Dave Europe. You can come up. Obviously, talk stop if anyone wants to stop.
Yes,
Right, here he is, on his way. Just people a little bit as we get here. I think we'll look at all something on the watches. Alrighty, thank you. Welcome, Simon and Peter for the Harry Park.
Thank you, Martin. So today we are presenting the Harry Master Plan, seeking adoption. By way of background, you recall we had a multi-plan workshop back in November. We discussed a number of big issues presented through the consultation document, one of which was competition space in Southern Trust Centre or STEM and the space surrounding area park to use. That process that we go through with all multi-plan issues identifies the problems. And for this area, it is issues across a number of different sporting codes, particularly for indoor court space, netball to move indoors, and disjointed turfs related to golf. Also looks at opportunities that present at that time with the approaching hockey turf needing to be renewed in a short time frame, 3 to 4 years out. At that time, the discussion was had that for us, council to go away and look at updating the existing area master plan. It's been in place since 2008. The team have engaged RSO to do that. We talked closely with a number of stakeholders and communities of the venue to create the updated master plan, which and essentially the adoption of this plan ensures that any future or suggested changes, things we'd like to take out to consultation aligns with the strategic focus for this site.
Questions for the team? Councillor Burke.
Your netball numbers, they seem to reduce dramatically. Is that what they want?
So that reflects that they will be, that all of their senior competitions will be played inside. So they won't need, the requirement won't be so heavy on those courts. I think there was definitely just a little acknowledgement in the consultation that they had with RSL and with through the Space and Places strategy that moving inside would reduce that requirement on those outdoor courts. The plan also does include a future option of potentially covering 1 to 2 of the outdoor courts with a like a carport. I don't know the proper term. Like a carport. So that they're able to play sort of all weather on the 2 premier outdoor courts.
Another question: did they consider that it's actually a bigger sort of function facility for like the young farmers and their big dinners and banquets? Did they consider a big catering facility out there or a kitchen? Is that included in there for say potential functions such as banquets? Is their biggest area that can actually put a lot of seated people for?
So within the event centre itself, yes, so the consultation, so Nigel Davenport was also, he was on the steering group for the master plan review, and so there was engagement around the events side of the use of STEP, and so the master plan itself, that is sort of the preliminary sketch, hasn't gone down to that great detail, but there's definitely the recognition that the event centre is used for multiple purposes, and at the moment there is that conflict between having events there and having ongoing sporting competition. So if there's an event on Friday night, you can't play that sport. So the feasibility stage to redevelop the RE Southern Trust Event Centre itself would look into more specific details around the size of catering facilities, numbers of toilets, all of that. That would come at a deeper level of analysis, but absolutely the events have being factored into this master plan.
Yeah, like, and I can speak to that. I think that function that you mentioned, we cater for about 800 people, and so it's not actually restrained to the kitchen facilities, etc. It's actually the alternative use and moving us where we is at and optimising facilities. So this brings space out to the catering. Any other questions for the team? No, so really just to recommendation. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to move option one, just as long as they keep remembering where our outer facilities we've got within our district, then we can still use those. So, yeah, I think the whole idea with going forward for the next 20 odd years and encouraging extra sport facilities within our district is important. So, yeah, I'm happy to move.
Thank you. And Councillor Rowley, did you want to speak to the new colour that you chose out at the stadium?
It's very good. No,
no, that's okay. A lovely.
I had no choice in the colour.
Those
as His Worship was alluding to, they painted the front of the Temuka grandstand in the same colours at Pleasant Point. Around the team.
Pointed out to him.
I think there's some paint
I even noticed it.
Yeah, I even noticed it. Well, thank you for
let's just breathe in your
Thank you. I think this is a great piece of work. This evidence base as far as what we need to move. So I'm going to move in a second. Put the motion to the floor. Yes. Cool, thank you.
I'll just note with regards to moving forward with this, there will be an option presented to council in the budget around the implementation and phasing of stage 1 of Aotearoa Park master plan. So it isn't step, it is that stage 1 because it does involve a lot of other sort of auxiliary budget around that. So yeah, that'll be coming within the LTP budget framework for options around that.
Fantastic, thank you. Alrighty, so then we move on to 10, which is business consideration is done. Legal nominations is none, we'll consider trading from the public forum, and we'll now move to exclusion of public forum. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, because we're moving that out.
And perfect timing when you reminded me, I knew I was going to forget. So we move to 13.4, which is the bleachers. Yeah.
Right. So just moving this report from public excluded into public, it will be the exemption of any commercial details and information relating to the global pricing of the budget will last be discussed and public excluded. Right, so as you know, the replacement of the bleachers, which are at the end of their life, was scheduled for, was planned for, as projected year 4 of the long-term plan. We have, over the last 2 seasons, taken measures to improve the strength of the bleachers through implementing topping, and we included in the plan for this year to get that project implemented and completed. We were at is that we're close to being able to go to market for replacement bleachers. We've worked through a number of options. Early on, we were looking at some options that were probably considered innovative, such as lightweight concrete fill solutions, contractors that we've worked with in the past that provide that solution to fill tunnels and do various underground works, and it was looked at as a promising option for this facility that would achieve the purpose of being less invasive and be able to be completed more quickly and hopefully more cheaply. We've worked through that option and we've largely ruled that out. From a price point, it's not is likely not materially advantageous over a rebuild, and there's risk associated with the option. It's not the purpose for which that product is used is not this type of project, therefore we felt there was risk in that, and we also felt there was a sustainability issue associated with the use of that much concrete on a construction project. So we ruled that out, and we've also, so we're looking essentially at a design build or similar procurement option for this project. We would like to proceed with the procurement and test the market around that. We do need to raise, there are some challenges with that in terms of timing, in terms of risk to getting the project completed and delivered by December next year. And we need to really go to the market, engage with the market to see the feasibility or otherwise of being able to achieve that. We have the option of keeping the bleachers as it is for the season if required, and we really need to raise that, the potential of that with council, given the timeframes that we are dealing with. So what we're looking for at the moment is to proceed with a procurement. We know that the market is constrained at the moment, and there's a number of contractors that we can still engage with. We need to get a firm idea of feasibility in terms of variability, capacity, timing, costs of doing this project for us. That would enable us the opportunity to then re-look at what we've got in front of us once we've done that. So, the option and the low risk option would be to defer the project at this point in time for another year in terms of the construction work, and continue with the planning, the design, the procurement, some physical works in the meantime, such as drainage. The team so far will work around the requirements with the project, and there are some issues that we have to work through, such as drainage, retaining wall requirements, site access, resource consent requirements, potential requirement of archaeological authority for the project, etc. So, local projects, there is some complexity to it, and these are matters that we need to work through. And then another issue that we need to discuss is the ability to deliver the project within the budget that was set in as part of a long-term plan, which in today's value is 1.79 million, and the challenge of completing the project within that budget also needs to be discussed.
Donna, are we looking at the traditional, what sort of method are we using to go to the contractors? So what sort of method are we approaching contractors with? Design and build, or are we?
Yeah, so design and build, but with the knowing that there are some complexities with the project that might not be able to be within that. There might be some things to be done around that. The design and build might not normally capture the, for example, demolition work, that's where that can be captured as part of the package, whether we can award separate packages. So that, it's always preferable to have a single point of responsibility on the project, but in this case, with just some of the issues that exist within the project, there may be a requirement to award some separate packages.
What's your preference?
So I think that it just really comes down to what's best for the situation at the time. So what we're trying, in terms of what we're trying to achieve, is there an advantage in terms of timing, budget, or otherwise, or taking a different approach? Is it even possible for a contractor to do the entire scope of what we're asking for? We'll leave that at least. So those are the things that we need to work out.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chris Donna. It says in the report about the drainage and all that, you're quite confident that did cause a lot of the issues with the breaking down of the concrete in the previous build.
Yeah, it's certainly been identified by the current team as well as the previous reference that it has contributed to the degradation of the facility.
The other questions that I made, the storage, where would, if you were going, it says on that recommendation on B, exclude the requirements for underneath storage, there would be another cost somewhere with that for storage somewhere else.
So one of the one of the items that hasn't been included in the original budget was provision for the displacement of the tenant, which is the Carolina Bay Association. So they store their carnival equipment beneath the bleachers and also have a workshop here. So this project is displacing them, and we need to work to review how we will manage that.
So that was all already going to happen.
We're still working through that with them. They've been working with them since end of 2019 about this project. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I guess some of the other issues. So we've had a project originally scoped within the long-term plan. The idea was it would be like an all-like placement in terms of what's there, except for example, we're probably not going to be able to accommodate undercarriage sort of storage. We have worked through with for example, with the parks team, one of the various different options that we could look at in terms of this facility. They took the view that it's working quite well as it is. It has worked quite well in terms of not causing, meeting the purpose of not causing any problems. It's a good location. It works well for large events. Obviously, we get a few events here where it's at full capacity, but it gets recreational use outside of that. So at this stage, it's not a case of proposing anything substantially different to what is currently here, other than with the potential for the future stuff like options such as a roof or shade sails to be possibly be included in the future. And then there's been some of the feedback that we've received from users as well, particularly shade and preferably roof, but acknowledging that we've got budget constraints with that as well. So, yeah.
I think a question for me before I go to Councillor Booth. In regard to, we talked about briefly earlier, disability, particularly we've got a staircase at the moment. With this, it's just like for like, so we wouldn't be looking to have wheelchair access, first level or anything like that. It's just pretty much like for like.
I don't think that would be entirely too difficult. I think for a contractor to contemplate in terms of the facility, I think that we talk about accessibility in terms of any designs, etc. I would expect of us in this day that we would be including accessibility as a consideration for the project. So that's something that we'd be asking the contractor to consider as part of their design.
Thank you. Councillor Booth.
The recommendation seems to sum it up pretty well, in my opinion. It leaves our options open as to one question was that I was quite keen to have it included is some other activities in the Carolina Bay, perhaps a master plan, but I understand it's being included in the city hub. But no, what I've just read here actually sums it up quite nicely.
Thanks, Alan. And I mean, we do need to be, in regard to option 2, which is deferral, we need to probably be quite realistic at this point. We discussed that motion. But is there any questions around that? No. So, any other comments, John, before we?
No, so I think just to pitch out some of the items that we would have raised into in the pricing and budget discussion. But when we look at, for example, what the original budget covered and some of the things that we've identified that are likely not covered within the original budget, we talk, so for example, what is the, is the design comes in going to be representative of the design from which the original project was scoped? We've got to deal with things like, or is it going to be structurally different? We've got things like construction cost inflation, which doesn't always align with the inflation allowance that we make within our long-term plan. We've got a big unknown regarding addressing the drainage and retaining wall requirements at the back of the site. We've got some site access challenges which have been identified in the report, tree root requirement, potential for archaeological assessment and authority. Displaced tenant and those sorts of things. So those are the things that we'll be moving through.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Don. I guess the key thing for this, for me, is if we defer, then we really manage this process well in this project in the new year, because we've had some fencing up there for a little while, and it's not a, it's not the ideal look as far as that facility. So I think if we commit to this now, we need to do what we say we're going to do. I think in regard to budget, I think I'm comfortable that you can go away, do some more work and come back, and then we can sign off a new budget moving forward. So I'm comfortable at this point to move recommendations 1 and 2. I have a second of that. Councillor Burt was slightly in front, Councillor Wills, so here's a seconder. I've got the motion to the floor, unless there's any further discussion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye. So when I looked at my year at one of my paragraphs where I said 21, I see construction, it was an option B, it mentioned construction, using the construction, basically, like, I just wanted to
Hear it.
yeah, I appreciate that. I really very much want to get this project delivered. We want to understand that there is time frames, and we need to manage that and give an alternative version.
Thank you. That's great. So we now just have to confirm some minutes. Public exclude, so I'll publicly exclude. Councillor Parker, thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried.